Welcome everyone to the Hispanic Heritage Month Lunch and Learn. Bienvenidos a esta conmemoración del mes de la herencia hispana. Este evento, or this event, is sponsored by the Equity and Inclusion Council and hosted by the WorkSource Beaverton Hillsborough. The Equity and Inclusion Council is...
Can you just make sure that, I think we may have
Just
put the
a
phone
moment.
next.
Are we still connected? Did we lose connection? Hi, can everyone hear us over the phone?
Okay, we're good. Sorry.
Yes? Good. Perfect. All right. So the Equity and Inclusion Council is a 12-member group of employees and advisory members sponsored by our director, Kay. We will be recruiting new members on January 2020. I can say that it truly is an amazing and gratifying experience. So if you're interested, please contact Teresa Rainey for more information. Today, we want to talk about the Hispanic heritage here in the state of Oregon. This Lunch and Learn is going to be a very special one. We have prepared this short presentation to provide some details on the Hispanic presence here in the state and how it is currently reflected among the Oregon Employment Department. We have with us two wonderful speakers. We have Eric Villegas from the Oregon Employment Department and Olivia Alcaire from the city of Hillsborough. All right, so what is the Hispanic Heritage Month and why are we celebrating it? Actually, it started as the Hispanic Heritage Week. It was established by legislation and signed into a law in 1968. Then in 1988, it was expanded into a month celebration. It is typically celebrated from September 15 through October 15, but this time we are extending the celebration. It started in the week of September 15 in commemoration of the anniversaries of independence for several Latin American countries. The National Hispanic Heritage Month celebrates the histories, cultures, and contributions of North Americans whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. Here in the Oregon Employment Department, we are strongly committed with promoting equity and inclusion. Minorities like the Hispanic community play a very important role in the development of our society. We are aware of it and have included in our affirmative action plan as one of our goals that we want to become an employer of choice for individuals of all backgrounds and promote an inclusive workplace culture that encourages diversity and allows employees to excel. Part of these, among the goals of this affirmative action plan are making a place where all employees can thrive, succeed, and look forward to coming to work each day. We want to serve as a model employer for implementing equity and inclusion initiatives in hiring, retention, promotion, and succession planning. For these, we gather demographic information that will help us determine unrepresented groups in specific areas, such as the data that some of the data that I'm going to be presenting. And this data was given to us by the Equity and Inclusion Council. The Equity and Inclusion Officer, which is Teresa Rainey. It is current, but may not reflect the most recent changes. So we have in here that as of October 2019, 13% of the total OED employees were identified themselves as Hispanic or Latino, and this accounts for around 169 out of 1,168 total employees. The officials and administrators category refers to those employees in charge of other employees, and this chart shows that 12% of the officials and administrators identify themselves as Hispanic or Latino, which is around 13 out of 96 total officials and administrators. And for the internal promotions, these are the internal promotions that occurred since January 2019. We have that 11% of those total promotions were of individuals who identified themselves as Hispanic or Latinos. So in this case, it's going to be around 8 out of 66 total promotions since January 2019. And these numbers are yet to be improved, but do show we are moving towards an alignment to the Hispanic representation in the state. For in the estimates of the census in 2017, it indicated that about 13% of the total Oregon population is Hispanic. All right, so according to a study published by the Pew Research Center in 2018, population estimates, 59.9 million people were in the U.S. were Hispanics, growing from 5% in 1970s to an 18% of the population in 2018. Hispanics are the second fastest growing racial or ethnic group, and Mexican origin accounts for around 60% of the total Hispanic population. This information is from the census of 2010, and it shows the distribution in Oregon by the Hispanic distribution in Oregon by place of origin. And this information is expected to change in the census 2020. In here we see that the majority are of Mexican origin with an 82%, followed by other Hispanic or Latino, which could be Spaniard, for example, with a 9%, then Central American with a 4%, Puerto Rican and South American with a 2%, Cuban with a 1%, and Dominican Republic with less than 1%. And again, odds are that these numbers will be impacted or changed in the census 2020 as recent natural disasters, especially in the Caribbean, have generated a significant migration wave. All right, so the Hispanics in Oregon is not a recent thing. Actually, according to data obtained from a report created by the Oregon Commission on Hispanic Affairs, the registry of Hispanics in Oregon dates back to the mid-19th century, with 37 Mexicans registered to serve as support troops with the 2nd Regiment Oregon Mounted Volunteers in the Roche River Wars. In 1980, the Oregon census listed 20 individuals, 5 of them women who were born in Mexico. And again, this could be also that they were born in California, which belonged to Mexico until 1848. Their occupations were miners, mill packer, washerwoman, seamstress, and laborers, and they resided in Oregon City, the Dalles, Fairfield, Salem, Roche River, and Josephine County. By 1920, the census enumerated 569 Mexicans under the category of foreign-born adults. In 1930, the census recorded more than 1,500 people of Mexican descent. And during World War II, the Bracero program was created by a presidential executive order, and that was in 1942. The program contracted with nearly 500,000 Mexicans to work in the United States from 1942 through 1947. And this is a picture of 1944, gathered from the Oregon Encyclopedia from the Oregon Historical Society. All right, so the Bracero program, also referred to as the Mexican Farm Labor Program, was established between the United States and Mexico and designated to help U.S. farmers meet their needs while many were away at war. More than 15,000 Mexican workers came to Oregon as braceros. Growers became so fond with Mexican labor that continued to recruit them after war when the program ended. And Mexican Americans from Texas and documented and undocumented workers were among those recruited. These early settlers have carved spaces in the economic, social, and civic creation of the state. They created the foundations and infrastructure for many Hispanic immigrants who came to the state in the following decades. And who are Hispanics nowadays? They are doctors, lawyers, teachers, government workers, bankers, business owners, laborers, farm owners, college and university alumni, among many others. And their wealth and spending power have contributed to the creation of wealth in the state of Oregon. Now, we have our guest speakers. Please come forward, Eric Villegas, who is our Universal Access Coordinator, and Olivia Alcaire, who is an elected official from the city of Hillsborough.
Do I wear this one or?
Sure.
Thanks.
Olivia and Eric, thank you so much for being here. And Olivia, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at the city of Hillsborough.
Yes, I'm a Hillsborough City Councilor and I vote. And I make decisions about what we're going to do with our city and what kinds of, all kinds of services and resources that we want to create for our citizens. And about 107,000 people live in Hillsborough. 42% of those are people of color. And and then within that is 24,000 people who are Latino who are living in Hillsborough. And I am one of them, and I live in Ward 3. And if you know Hillsborough, I live next to Chute Park. I never intended to join Hillsborough City Council. There was an opening, and I knew of people in the community, and they came to me and talked and wanted to know if I wanted to run. And, you know, I never had that plan. And, but I'm an educator. I was working at PCC, and I have worked at Portland State as an advisor doing orientation, but really helping students get into college, stay in college, and graduate and move on to other goals. And a lot of them were undocumented students. And so at that time, there were a lot of protests happening around Sanctuary City, and this was in November 2017. And so I just remember I wrote my letter of interest to be appointed, and there were 23 other people. I was selected. And what I saw happening inside our Civic Center around the time of Sanctuary City was a lot of protests from people in the community who were upset, and they were coming. People for Sanctuary City and people against Sanctuary City. And I lived in a liberal bubble over there at PCC, Rock Creek. And it was okay to be undocumented. It was okay to be Latino. And it was okay to have some future plans and goals. And then all of a sudden, here I was in this environment and that I hadn't seen since I was maybe 5, where I grew up in San Francisco and really saw racism spilling out all over the place. So this was shocking to me that this was happening in my city, but I'm grateful that I could be there for that vote as well as more. And when I started, I came after Olga Acuna, who was a city councilman before me. And on the landscape at that time in politics, she was the only Latina serving in a local government. I became the only Latina serving in local government and the only person of color on the council, which is all white. And I was the only woman for a while, and now we have another woman who is serving. But It's a hard battle, but I'm grateful to do it, and I'm happy to represent, and it's not just my community, it's all of Hillsborough. But Hillsborough is 42% people of color, and that's a lot of, including low income, vulnerable populations, who I know that you see coming into this site, and face a lot of struggle if they don't speak English, right? And then it's all dependent on what's their status and how much support can they get here. And once they get here, yes, there are people who speak Spanish, but clearly not enough, right, across the state. So thank you to those who are there and able to provide that service. More needs to happen for folks, in my opinion, in all levels. I'll just be brief, but since this past election, there are more Latinos who are running for office. And out here in Western Washington County, that feels really good. And I am a principal of Create Incorporated, which is an alternative school in Cornelius. We're housed at Centro Cultural, but we serve kids who are suspended or expelled from Forest Grove High School and NAMS. And guess what? Guess what demographic they meet? It's mostly Latino. And so these numbers are kind of disturbing. I am working on my doctorate in education leadership, and I'm examining what's happening to Latino students in 2 Hillsborough schools and who's helping them with their pre-college prep. I've worked as a board member for Being a Star of Oregon, which is a farm worker housing program, and have coordinated their education navigation pre-college prep program since 2011. I know the numbers of the students that are finishing. I know that there's not enough counselors who are helping them get ready, and they don't know about those first year college success programs that are available for Latino students at PCC and PSU. And so it's not going to be too much of a surprise, but I will be looking at my work. But I just wanted to share that much, and I'll stop.
Thank you. No, that was wonderful.
Thank you. And Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do here in the Oregon Employment Department.
Absolutely. And first of all, is this on? Okay, excellent. So my name is Eric Villegas. I'm the Universal Access Coordinator for the Employment Department and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, or HECC. And I focus mostly on the WIOA programs and services. Universal Access Coordinator is kind of a pompous title, I've always said, but what I focus on is making sure that all of our programs, all of our services, all of our benefits are available and accessible equitably to all of the populations in the state of Oregon, regardless of what group or protected class it might be part of. I work with translations. I do some of them myself if they're in Spanish, or I will work with professional translators to translate all of our documents, or vital documents anyway, which is most documents that the Employment Department handles. Of course, I'm always open for suggestions, so please let me know if something is not properly translated or needs translation, or if there's a group or an individual that needs access that they're not receiving. It's always a constant, and I think you've certainly covered that, Olivia has. It's always a struggle to find out what services are available, what people can access, and a lot of times we run into things that, oh, we never thought that this would be an issue. So we want to constantly make sure that that everyone does have access to all of these services and programs. I started with the Employment Department back in '96, I believe. That's roughly when we moved to the state of Oregon. And I started working at the Albany office. I see some people who've known me since those days. And I was there for like 8 years, and then I moved to our central office in Salem. And I've worked in a variety of jobs there, including for a couple of years at the Foreign Labor Program, which is H-2A, H-2B. Now it's somebody else. Dora Dora Herrera, who works that. But I've done that, and I've worked with Fernando Gutierrez, who I see in the background as well. And he's our monitor advocate. And yes, I've been working again with our populations, and because I speak Spanish and bilingual, that was one of the things that got me into the state, and I work with those populations.
Now, Olivia, tell me, what is something that you think binds the Hispanic community together?
Language, community, culture. There's a lot of things that Latino community in Hillsborough is changing, especially a landscape of small businesses around Hillsborough, and increasing number of Latino-owned businesses that are also rising. And we have a robust Chamber of Commerce. They have Latino Chamber of Commerce within that. That's actually exploding. And it's grown a lot bigger than the Chamber of Commerce, and they are going to be hiring some more people to assist with that. But that gives me a sense that population's thriving. Our economic base is also shifting, and so that's a good thing to me. The whole reason why I moved out to Shute Park and next to there is because I started out here in the apartments behind Tanis Martin as I drove west. Then I came to Southeast 10th, and I thought, oh my goodness, where have I been all my life? So lots of businesses are happening, and we have a partnership with Prosperidad. That's a program out of Centro Cultural, which is to try to increase training opportunities for Latinos, get access to GED programming, to have secondary education, and I know the essential skills that they need to get for jobs. But those things all matter. We contribute money to that project, and it's also connected with PCC. And this is including WorkSource here and the employment department, where those people are going to find opportunities. So I see economics changing. As I mentioned before, a lot of students are graduating. Some are going to graduate school, but guess what? They're also joining boards too of organizations. And when I said I was like the only Latina, I submitted a letter. I ran unopposed in my first election. Well, a lot more people are being inspired to want to find out about what's happening with local government, and some are even considering for office. I helped 2 people this last election, Alexander Diaz-Rios, who is now board representative for PCC. And he is also a product of PCC, having gone through their Gateway program after being at Hillsborough High School. He is a success. And the other person is Narce Rodriguez, who just joined the school board for Forest Grove. So the presence of those 2 people out in those 2 communities, and my students come from there, is raising the recognition of what power we can have if we just try to go out. We have voting power, but a lot of us are not voting. So I hope all of you who are voting, who can vote. That's a messaging that we have to get out to youth. And I know it's a struggle for this upcoming election to get young people and millennials to participate in this vote and how important it is, but that's a reality that I personally want to change. So there's also a recognition that's happened where there's acknowledgement of immigrant experience for people. And I was there, and barely could talk about Sanctuary City and why we needed it, to the point now we've had a lot of conversation. It's become normal to understand, hey, we've got disparities over here that we need to address, and it's affecting this community in this way, and we have to be inclusive of what's happening and start talking to organizations that serve those folks. That's just a few of the things that I see change, and I'm really excited about this. Like I said, I did not care about politics before, but I hope 2 people get elected into some critical positions that are going to be good for all of us. So get involved.
Absolutely. I just want to jump in real quick and say how much I admire that, and I appreciate what you're. Oh, sorry. Talk louder. I will project. So I was just saying that I appreciate the work that you're doing, and it kind of goes into the question that Sulimar was asking about what brings us together. Yes, you mentioned culture, and language, and within those, I think the idea of family, because we do tend to be very family-oriented, but also, and you mentioned this as well, I'll just say the current climate of the country has led a lot of people to come together even more, and as you said, people are joining boards, which is very exciting, very, very exciting, and who knows, maybe that's kind of the push that we needed in a roundabout way, but that's very encouraging.
They're everyday folks, just like you.
Exactly.
And everybody else
Exactly.
across the state. I'm talking to you about this also.
And Eric, what challenges have you faced in a society that's largely white or Caucasian?
Well, I read that question when you sent it to us. I was struggled a little bit because I don't know if anyone can see, but I'm pretty white myself. I am Mexican. I'm also a white Mexican. I'm very aware of that. I do know that growing up in Mexico City, I was a privileged Mexican. My family was part of the boom of middle-class families in the 70s in Mexico City, which was a thing. I was part of it. So I think my struggles might have been less than some, certainly. I'm the first one to admit I never worked in the fields. My parents never worked in the fields. But in terms of struggles, I've certainly, I would say it's mostly with language. When there's been a couple of times since I've been here, and luckily they've been few and far between, but a couple of times I've encountered people not wanting me to speak Spanish, and this has been at work, not people I work with, but a couple of times because my phone message is bilingual. There have been messages left that make a point of me speaking Spanish that they didn't particularly like, and of course I've had to deal with that. But again, I've been fortunate, I think, in these struggles.
And same question for you, Olivia. What challenges have you faced in a society that's largely non-Hispanic?
Well, let's see. I'll start with city council, because when I joined, the people who encouraged me to apply said, you know, you're going to be working with 6 white men. I was coming from PCC. I'm telling you, I chose who I wanted to hang around with. I was like, okay, you know, so I thought, I'll see what this is like. But I know my privilege. My dad was in World War II, along with a lot of my uncles. My dad he got a degree in engineering. I have uncles who did electrician and some other kinds of stuff. My dad, his 4-year degree, in that time, he went to school at night while my mom took care of the kids during the day. And he was working during the day too, and going to school. So when I was born, we had a house, and my dad's job moved us around, and we moved from South San Francisco when I was born, which is just a little ways away from San Francisco, and we moved up here to Beaverton, to Oak Hills. I was 6. This was in 1966. And so we were there for 2 years, and the first time that I was really around all white people. We were the only Mexicans, I felt like. And my dad, while we were there, it was great. I got to know a lot of people, a lot of difference. And my dad made friends with a Native American man, and I remember visiting his house and getting to know that family, and that man showed my dad how to go hunting and stuff like that. We eventually moved back because while we were living in Oak Hills and it was great, my parents used to have to borrow a truck from one of our friends to go drive down to San Francisco, to go to the mission, to go get tortillas, chiles, y frijoles, todo eso, because we couldn't find it here. And so, you know, they're coming back with a caravan and stuff. You know, we were like, oh my God, look at that. But growing up there and being a Latina, like people couldn't figure out what I was because I'm not really dark as a Mexican. I'm not really dark. 3 of my grandparents migrated up here from northern Mexico, so Tijuana, Sonora, Nayarit. One of my grandparents, my grandfather came from Spain by way of Cuba, Philippines, and then in San Francisco. My grandmother on my mom's side raised 6 kids as a farm worker in Imperial Valley in California, and she got 2 plots of land, but they were picking up and down the Imperial Valley. And along with that, her 6 children, the 4 boys, got into World War II, Korean War. My mom, her oldest sister, was married off at age 14. And my mom was with my grandmother, and they migrated up to San Francisco, and that's where she met my dad and got married. My recollection of growing up in San Francisco during those times, very racist. I remember it was ugly times. There was a lot of protests always happening on TV with Angela Davis. I remember Alcatraz Indians. Life in San Francisco for me, we didn't live in the Mission District, but that's where we went every weekend to be with our family and community. And on the weekend, we're in white community in suburb, living in a house. And I can remember distinct times being in a classroom and a teacher doesn't understand me. There was never anybody in my entire college education or K through 12 who knew how to say alcaide. Just 2. And I studied history. I did Mexican history at PSU. I got a bachelor's and a master's. I went down to Chiapas and I researched what happened to a rainforest and came back. But I have experienced racism in a lot of different ways, which I see kind of reflected in what my experience on city council was like at first when I started. And I had to be really thoughtful of how I could respond. And back in the day, things were ugly. And you don't know how to respond to racism when it just happens to you, you know. And I have been, you know, my Spanish, I didn't learn it, you know, that wasn't my first language. And I'm kind of bad at the grammar, though I tried. And my language is based in Poche, which I'm from California. I'm on Chicana experience. And so I know Spanish. I know Spanish better now than when I was growing up. But fighting through it now, when I think about it, I'm fighting not just because I'm going to react in some kind of way, but I'm thinking like, how can I react in a way that's going to continue to widen pathways? And so it's not always easy.
No, it's not.
And trying to explain who you are and your historical background to people who have never had to study it ever in their life. And trying to make them understand those things sometimes can be a challenge. But I see more opportunities in having dialogue about difference. And, you know, I've had somebody who's in the way and the opposite end of me on city council, who recently I found out that the city compensates people for speaking Spanish. I don't know if the Oregon Employment Department does that for you, but they do that for employees. And I was like asking the city manager, okay, so what about city councilors? And there was another counselor in the room. He said, well, I speak German, so maybe we should have that for German. And so the person we were talking to, well, there's not enough need for somebody who's German speaking only. So if there's a colony out here in Hillsborough who German speaking only people, let me know. But it's that type of thing that somebody doesn't understand why there has to be bilingual resources, period. I'm coming from institutions who say so, and you have to do that. I'm a principal of a, you know, alternative school, and I tell them we're a bilingual, bicultural school, because they're, you know, kind of proud, but there's a lot of changes not happening fast enough to keep up with the population that's growing and becoming more trained, professional, experienced, and willing to fight for things. So I could tell you about the times when people called me names or because they didn't know what I was in my youth, but you know, it's a struggle that could still continue.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it does. And you mentioned a few things that, of course, sparked me thinking about. I have to project, I have to remember that this does not necessarily catch everything. I certainly saw struggles with my father, for instance, because, of course, his English was minimal, and he struggled with the language. In Mexico, he was a purchasing agent. He was pretty successful at that. When we moved to the States, there was no way he was going to be able to get that kind of jobs. And so he struggled with that. He worked in factories where he was called a wetback, even though we came here perfectly legally, and I use that term, of course, understanding the whole history behind all that, but he was called that. I had to go with him in some cases to translate for him, so I saw all of that. And then, of course, starting to work with the employment department, I would see it with the people coming in, where they had to come in with either their children or at least somebody else to help translate and interpret. So I certainly see that struggle with our customers as well who come in.
Eric, what advice would you give to an ally?
I also struggle with that with that question, but I think the fact if they're allies and they want to be allies, that's wonderful. I would say, again, not to get political necessarily, or maybe so, I don't know, but be aware of who you're voting for. I do know that the economy is very important, absolutely, but look at the whole package. See how it may affect other people, other communities, and just be aware of people running for office.
And Olivia, what advice would you give to an ally?
Well, I just finished that. Who are trying to help Ukraine and Syria and Turkey, right?
Yes, yes.
What advice I would give? Allies are important, very important to me, and hopefully they understand why they need to be an ally. But I think that if we're talking about allies, and we're not talking about Latino allies,
Right.
if we're talking about white allies, here's what I'd say: they got to take a step back and let people of color lead. They need to not take a front row in guiding how Latino policies should be or how Latino anything should occur, and that there should be Latino leadership who are speaking out on behalf of that. And if we have allies when we go through that process, that's great. But if they are behaving in a way where they are not allowing you to speak, that's not a real ally. And it's hard sometimes to explain that. I think that people are very well-intentioned and want to do the right thing, and that's okay. And mistakes are also okay, because we're not perfect people, and I don't think we should approach equity in that way. But they really do got to take a step back. And I've said so in a council meeting, and I'll continue to say so in a council meeting. We are drafting a statement of equity, where other cities like Portland are pushing for anti-white nationalism. Our city wants to put out an equity statement, and they've consulted some people around the city, but remember, there's 24,000 Latinos, 40% people of color, and I think they've talked to a handful of people, including the 2 Latinos who do come to the council meetings and do engage with the elected. So that's telling me that maybe they're, out of the 24,000 Latinos, that they're missing some input from people. And I have asked people, because I have been involved recently in hate crimes that have happened to people, and having to work with the police department who go back and do a second report, and they find out there's more information they need to take, or they were missing some stuff. But I think those things are happening. And I'm getting engaged. And why do those things have to require a second police officer to come out and look at the evidence that a victim has, or understand maybe they got to bring somebody out for translation because it's not always automatic. And they know that I've gotten involved. One of them, I invited the mayor to come over, and we met together with this woman and talk about how she was assaulted in the post office on First and Main by somebody who felt she shouldn't be there, and she's 63. So I know these things are happening. The mayor came over. We didn't do it as a Kodak moment and put it all over Facebook or anything like that, but it was about, he's the mayor, this is your citizen. You don't believe in what's happening. You need to hear what she's got to say. She was not involved in the draft of the equity statement. I asked her, do you trust the police? And she said no. We had a lot of interaction. So this statement, to me, and I will say this when we go to pass it, it's nice. It's a nice statement. It's nice words. But vulnerable communities don't need nice words. Vulnerable communities need support and action, and they need recognition, and on down the line. So, so there's a lot of work to do, but you know, we're trying.
Right, we do have one more question, but I would like to open up for questions from people, and if there are not many and we still got time, we're going to proceed to the last question. Does anyone here in the room or the ones that are connected have questions for our speakers? Okay, we have one.
I'm just wondering, that PowerPoint that you had, you were going through, as to who put that together and got that info and data?
I did, and I have the referenced articles and the following slide.
My question is, there was one phrase in your, about the Bracero program back in the 40s, that it states on your presentation that the ag industry was very fond of the workers that they were bringing. I don't know that being fond of a workforce that was exploited and discriminated, and that they didn't pay them, and they didn't have bathrooms, they didn't have water. Is that why that industry was fond of these workers?
That I did put it exactly as they said in the report. That was from the Oregon Commission for Hispanic Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
I do not have an answer.
I can tell you a little bit. So the Bracero program started in the 30s, and they were bringing people up to work in fields with also livestock, cattle, and all that kind of thing. It continued, and then there's the Depression, and then there's World War II, and then the Korean War. So yeah, we were taking advantage of having labor working here for a lot less. And it wasn't until the Cesar Chavez movement when they were guaranteed a wage and union representation. And so before all of that, anything happened that was illegal.
You know, the Bracero program, we now, the employment department manages or oversees the H-2A program, which is just another name for the Bracero program. We're bringing in workers from Mexico, and we go out and do outreach activities and talk to the workers and stuff. And so we run into the same old story from the 40s and the 30s of no water, no bathrooms, no pay. Women get discriminated, sexually abused out in the fields. So, you know, it's the exploitation is alive and well.
Yeah, the migrant camps are still happening out
Yes.
in Western Washington County. And
Yeah, so someone asked if we could repeat the question. And so I just summarized it by saying that the question was on a slide that stated how the U.S. favored Mexican agricultural workers when it was really about how they were exploited. Fernando, did I summarize that?
Yeah, just
correctly?
the word that, you know, that was up there, that the ag industry was fond of these workers. That, to me, is more or less, to be frank, insulting.
yeah, it is.
Let me clarify, the intention was never.
I realize
I do
that you just
apologize
took
for
that
it.
data from somewhere.
If you don't know Vienna Star, they're a nonprofit in Western Washington County, and they provide fair housing for farm working families. In Hillsborough, Cornelius, Forest Grove, and I think Scappoose, they have a site. They have another one in Aloha. So when they built their properties, their newest one in Juniper Gardens in Forest Grove has a place where people can go, workers can go wash off their work boots after working in the fields before they go into their house. There's a community room there where people can have gatherings. They've got community gardens there so people want to grow some food. So it's a good organization that tries to address a lot of things what's happening, but there's not enough space, right, to get into there. One of the things we have an affordable housing bond for Metro that's come up, and I've asked the pointed question of whether or not any of that housing funding is going to support undocumented families, and at least in Hillsborough, yes it is. And it all depends on what happens with the federal funding that comes through there, because it may not.
We have any more questions?
I just want to add a note that as a MSFW migrant season farm worker representative, and what I saw there and what I'm seeing currently as in the construction sector is very, very similar.
Yeah.
About the labor and Hispanic community and how they gauge the pay in comparison to non-Hispanic workers and also women as well.
I have students that I'm trying to encourage them to finish their diploma so they can get jobs. They get construction jobs through family or landscaping. And some are working in fields too. So there's this continued pattern of how people are earning a living.
Just one last, note. You talked about it when you folks talked about the contributions that Latinos and Hispanics or Mexican Americans or Chicanos. I mean, we have all kinds of acronyms for ourselves. But the fact is that, yes, there's a lot of us that have progressed and moved up. I'm very lucky in the situation that I'm at and the job that I have. And there's a lot of suit and ties. But the farm worker community that's out there that helps feed this whole country is one of the biggest contributions that anybody can possibly make. They're just not recognized for that contribution. Right,
they're not. And the great food scene that's happening in Portland, the restaurants and all that, I haven't gone because I just have a concern about who's working in the kitchen and not being recognized on Food Network because somebody's making some really great chicken or something like that. And I can't control where I eat all the time and who's working and have that perspective, but I think about it a lot, and I think I can do that in Hillsborough. And there are many of us who are elected, and so we were like, hey, let's get together. And so we decided to get together and talk, and then we wanted to throw our money towards a Latino-owned business. So I think that when we can do things like that and demonstrate our voting power, our economic power, people will pay more attention. We have it. We just haven't really used it that much. There's a leadership program that happens in Hillsborough and called Leadership Hillsborough. And my colleague over here, Sonia, is in the program with me. And we're learning about Hillsborough, all kinds of stuff. Had recent helicopter rides. But we're learning about these things. And we had to take Max, we had to do public transportation, and so go through that. So, our community does this all the time. And it's weird to not drive around and we actually having to walk and get on the Max and commute that way. Train, how often the train runs, does it run close to somebody's job? When I think about affordable housing, what we're gonna have, and the city says, well, a quarter of a mile is okay, and I'm saying to resources. And I'm thinking about the Latina mother with the kids and the stroller, and maybe she's got some walking and she's got a baby inside and she's got space she can pack stuff up. And if she gets food from a pantry and then she's got to unpack all the kids and then they got to walk back to their apartment, right? So affordable housing can't be in places where people can't easily access resources. And to me, I don't know how many moms here would have been willing to go a quarter of a mile with their kids to go to a pantry, or dads, and then go all the way back. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's extreme.
I'm just going to jump in real quick and, am I projecting? Okay. Go back to Fernando's original point, and I don't know if people were able to hear it, but going back to the farm workers, it's absolutely true. If it weren't for them, none of us would be eating, and none of us would probably be here. I myself have, like I said, I've never worked in the fields, so I have to thank farm workers for providing for me at the very basic level, and I think it is very much a struggle, again, like it was mentioned, for them, for the farm workers, because they are the ones who we should be supporting so much. They're the ones who we should be, I mean everyone, I don't mean just them, but again, because they're the basis of the whole, really of the whole society, in order for us to continue and do other things and wear suit and ties and whatnot. If there was a way, and I know monitor advocates across the country try and do this, and MSFW representatives try and do this to get these people good working conditions, because again, they deserve them. They deserve probably one of the better work conditions than any of us, and they're not getting them. They're not getting them. The work is hard, and then the living conditions, unfortunately, are not what they should be. So yes, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for bringing up.
Yeah, just one more thing,
Yes,
but I
and-
feel that they're out, Washington DC, there's a lot of people who do not understand this region
absolutely.
and how it developed, and that it belonged to Mexico, just below Salem. So they don't have any clue about how this part of the country has developed and why people are even here. And so when they talk about wanting to close the border and stuff and caging kids and adults as punishment for wanting to come here, hope for a better policy maker soon, 2020.
Yeah, just a quick question. How can we support our community in Washington County, especially because there's a lot of, like you say,
Yeah.
a lot of Latinos, Hispanics in the area?
School board meetings are important. So we have Erica Lopez, who's serving on Hillsborough School District, and then Narcia Rodriguez, who's serving on Forest Grove, and she's representing Forest Grove and Cornelius families. Go to those meetings. There are issues that come up all the time. There are parent advisory committee meetings where a lot of people go in Hillsborough and Cornelius, but I know Olga does a lot of great work with there and reaches out to people. We are looking for people in Hillsborough to join our commissions, advisories, and commissions, Sonia, to get involved, and there you get like on the library board, and then you got some decision-making power about what the library's gonna do. There's other groups, there's other committees, and if you're not in Hillsborough, how many of you are in Hillsborough? How good. Okay, so some of you who live in other parts, Beaverton has these same things. So do other cities. Find ways to get involved. And, the idea with the Civic Leadership Academy that we do in the city is a pathway. And so we have a group right now, and we're creating a pathway. That is how somebody became a council member this last election. So the work that we're doing in our community leadership that's sponsored by Hillsborough Chamber is very helpful in understanding. I'm sure you're getting I am too, greater understanding about what the needs are across the city. That is where you can get involved. That is where you can support our community. Pay attention to what cities are doing. We're using your tax dollars to do a lot of stuff, and you should be concerned about some of the things that come up. I'm voting for good things that we're doing for our city, but that's how to get involved. And I think you're at the Oregon Employment Department and WorkSource together. So you have an understanding of what that is going to look like as we come into a new recession, right? Yes. And access to Spanish speaking. materials in Spanish, guidance about what organizations they should be going to, because if we're speaking, relying mostly on community, that's Centro Cultural, Prosperidad, it could be Bienestar, it could be Oregon OHDC, who did employment support as well. You have to reach out with these folks and work together to try to support our community in this process. So that's what I would, there's a lot more.
I have a question. So when getting the communication out to the individuals, like in the schools, are you using the technology that we have now, that, you know, text messages, like the alert system that we currently have for major things and for like events?
Yeah, well, yes. I think we had a shakedown today, like everybody else in the state. We've had presentation on, there was the recent, I forget where, the city council or city, where a shooter went in and did that. So we had a training about that. We are also preparing for the big earthquake, the Cascadia, trying to educate our communities and knowing how to prepare. And so doing this in Spanish as well. It's a lot. And so our city staff will work with organizations like Centro and Bienestar to go to they will host events, and they are engaging with them also. But when I started, I was like yelling out, meet with these people, go to these organizations, try out, and now they're doing that. So it helps.
We're out of time. We want to thank you very much, our guest speakers, for being here and for sharing your experiences with us. We want to also thank all of you for taking the time and being here. And thank you, Sonia, for offering to host this event. Thank you so much, Jake, for helping organize the event. You've been really awesome. And see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.